thanks for joining me. So a lot of people really struggle with freehand sharpening, with just, a stone and your knife, and you need to sharpen it. Maybe you're out in the field, and it's something that takes a little bit of time to develop the skill to do it well. We have all kinds of guided sharpeners these days that you can set up and put your knife in it and get these perfect angles and edges. And that's great if you're at home, or if you have something like that set up. But I know for me, setting the thing up and getting it all adjusted and sharpening, a knife or two and then packing it all away, it's just more trouble than it's worth when I know how to freehand sharpen a knife. And so I tend not to use my guided sharpeners as often. Usually I really only use them if I'm trying to establish or maybe reestablish an edge on a knife that's been, maybe the edge has been damaged or something. But from day to day, I just use a stone and my knife, whether it's something in my kitchen or a pocket knife or whatever, and I freehand sharpen them. So there's a few tricks to learning how to do this, and it is a skill you have to develop. It's not like you're going to pick up a stone and a knife for the first time and just produce a great edge. It's probably not going to work out that way. It takes a little bit of practice, but there's some few things I can show you that might make it a little bit easier and help you be more successful at it. So let's get on the workbench behind me here so I can show you from above, and I can kind of show you what I'm doing and up close, and talk about how I do this and kind of how I developed my process for doing it. I probably do it differently than what you've seen or maybe even read other people doing. I'll just explain that and show it when we get on the workbench, but I kind of have my own way of doing it. Anyway, let's get on the bench and we'll take a look and see what you think. Hey, before we get started, real quick, I've had a number of people send me messages or emails and ask me if I had a Patreon account or if I had a buy me a coffee thing set up so they could make a donation to the channel. And I hadn't really done that up till now. I guess really hadn't considered it, but I've had enough people ask about it that I decided to go ahead and set up a buy me a coffee thing. And I'll put a link in the description down below if you'd like to buy me a coffee. Proceeds from that would go to help support the channel. And if you are so inclined to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is some stones you might use to do this sharpening with. One of my favorites is this one by Spyderco. It's called a double stuff, and it is two ceramic stones that are glued together, I guess you might say. I'm not sure what they're glued with, but they seem really stuck. Anyway, so there's a really fine white ceramic on one side, and this brown is kind of a medium, and it's coarse enough that it'll leave a decent edge, but it still removes material really fast. And this, comes in a little leather carrying case, and just super handy. That usually goes in my briefcase whenever, or my bag whenever, not a briefcase, but a bag that I carry whenever I travel. These little card-size diamond stones are real handy. You can get these online. I'll put a link in the description for some of these. They're not too expensive. You can get them in different grits. This one is a 1000 grit, and it's kind of a not too coarse, not too fine. It's good enough for most general, edge sharpening if you're in the field. You can see I've used this one quite a bit. You can see how much use it's gotten. So that's really handy. I like those. This is just a DMT diamond stone. This one is an extra fine, which I believe is around 1200 grit. This is a little big to carry around in steel, so it's kind of heavy. I probably would only, have this in my stuff if I was maybe going car camping or something. I'm not going to carry this around in a knapsack. It's probably too heavy. But one thing I like about it is I glued on the back of it a piece of leather that I can use stropping compound on, and I use flex cut gold. You can see this bar has kind of been beat up and chipped, but you simply rub some of this onto the leather, and then you can strop your knife with it, and it will really polish the edge really nice. Failing having that, I often carry a little strop I made here. This is just a piece of oak that I cut out and glued some leather on. And actually, if you notice, it's got an angle on this end and it's rounded on this side. And I use this for some of my wood carving tools too. But again, I can rub compound on it and then use it to strop the knife. And I'll show you how to strop here in just a minute. So the other thing you can use is you can carry around, a conventional, this is a hard Arkansas and a black hard Arkansas, so it's pretty fine, and then really fine on this side. And I really like this stone. I've never used this one with oil. I've always used it in water. And actually, what I use this stone for, I don't travel with it much, but I'll use this in my kitchen because I can just a little bit of water from the tap, the sink, and I can sharpen some of my kitchen cutlery, and does a really nice job. And these aren't too bad, and they're relatively durable if you traveling around. But if you drop one of these, they do chip pretty easily, so you have to be careful. Anyway, for today's demonstration, I'm actually going to use this Spyderco double stuff, though. It is my favorite. Now, conventionally, if you read books and such, they're going to tell you to lay your stone, on a bench, and then take your knife and, raise it to the right angle and sharpen, right? And you can do that. Things like this double stuff, though, the stone is thin enough that the knife handle starts hitting the table. And so you'd have to elevate this on something taller to be able to do that. And it's just, in the field, when you're just working in the field, it's just kind of clumsy to have to, put the stone on a table. You might not even, depending on what you're doing, you might even not even have a table. And so it's just a little bit clumsy. So I like using this double stuff by Spyderco. You don't have to put any oil or water on this. You can just use it dry. When it gets, you can see how it marks up as you use it. And when it gets kind of dirty, you can use some Comet or Barkeeper's Friend and some water and scrub it, and all the black stuff just goes away. Really nice. You can rub it with an eraser, and I've tried doing that. It doesn't work, for me anyway, it doesn't work as well as scrubbing it with the Barkeeper's Friend is what I use. You could use Comet. I think Bonami is another one of those abrasive cleansers like you used to use on your porcelain bathtub or whatever. But I just use a little bit of a rag and some Barkeeper's Friend and some water and scrub this, and it comes clean. Okay, so the important thing about sharpening a knife is being able to match the angle of the edge that's currently there with what you're doing on your stone. And the general mistake most people make is to raise the knife up too high or too low. And if you're too low, you'll just scratch up the side of the blade. If you're too high, you're going to make a kind of a blunt angle that's hard to get really sharp. I found, and maybe it's just me, but my tendency to get the right angle, it seemed I wanted to go higher for some reason. I don't know. I always just tended to want to angle up more. It seemed like it was safer in terms of getting the stone exactly on the edge. And certainly you will get the stone on the edge, but you'll also make the edge more blunt by doing that. Now, there's a couple ways. If you're using an oil stone, when you put the blade on the stone, and if you raise it up, you'll actually see some oil bead up along the edge as the angle of the blade, the edge of the blade, forces some of that oil out. Since I'm using a dry stone here, that doesn't really help. Some people like to take a Sharpie, and this is probably something I would do just for practice sake, but you can take a Sharpie and put some black mark along the edge. There you go. Now I just marked my blade up. If you do that, some alcohol will take the Sharpie off. And then when you sharpen it, you can actually see if you're matching the edge. You can actually see where it wears off. And actually, I was angled a little low there for that knife. But you can actually see then where you're wearing the black mark off the blade. So it helps you, and you can just do a stroke or two and just kind of see where your angle is. And if you need to raise up a little bit more, you can see here, like on the tip, I don't know if we can get this close enough where you can see, I haven't worn the Sharpie off the very edge. I'm back a little bit from the edge. So, and sometimes the knife will have a steeper angle at one end and finer at another. So you kind of have to, sometimes your angle has to kind of vary a little bit as you sharpen. But once you're able to do this enough to ensure that you're getting right up to the edge of the knife blade, then you know you've got the right angle. And it just takes some practice. Once you kind of figure out what the angle is and you can see that, it's just a matter of practice to kind of lock that in. Now, from knife to knife, that can change. And a knife like this Delica 4, this has a really broad edge on it. You can see the bevel is pretty wide. The Spyderco knives have a pretty shallow angle. A lot of knives that you might buy, like this case, will have a little bit steeper angle. So you kind of have to just learn to look at the knife edge and judge it and see if we can, see if you can match that. Okay, I got to get that. That's alcohol. Get the Sharpie off the side of my blade here. Okay. So that's the first thing, is figure out your angle. Figure out the angle you need to be at. And a Sharpie, when you're first starting out, a Sharpie is really good. You can mark the edge and then take a few, practice strokes just to kind of lightly see where you're wearing off the Sharpie, off the edge, and then that'll help you find your angle. Once you've done that, it's just a matter of, now, safety note here. I tend to hold a stone like this, and I'll put my extra fingers down below, and I try to keep my fingertips below the edge. So I'm only kind of grabbing the edge of it. This double stuff is not very thick, so you have to kind of be careful. A card like this, it's impossible really to get your fingers below the edge. You just can't. So you have to be very careful not to run the knife right off the end of the stone and into your fingers. So fair warning here, if this makes you squeamish or you don't feel like you can reliably do that, get a bench stone, find a table to set it on, and learn to do it that way. It will be safer. If your stone tends to slide around, you can get some of that non-skid stuff like you put under carpet runners and things like that, and you can make it not slide. But I've done this with a lot of small stones, and this is how I learned to do this as a young man. Like I said, a lot of sharpening stones I would get back when I was a kid were about 2 or 3 inches long. They were made of carborundum, and they was too small to lay on a table. So I learned to hold a stone in my fingers and to not let my knife get into my fingers. It was just something I had to practice doing. And to be honest, I've never cut the end of my fingers doing this. That's not to say you can't do it, but I think if you're careful and just watch what you're doing, you can keep that knife edge off of your fingers. Now, if you can get your fingertips below the edge of the stone, then that's beneficial, and you can do this. Now, I usually take 2 or 3 strokes, 3 or 4 strokes in one direction, then flip the knife over. The challenge when you flip it over is duplicating that angle. And so again, this is kind of something you just have to learn to do by eye, but then you take a few strokes the other way, and you can keep doing that. Now, when you're using a real fine stone like this just to refine an edge, you're not going to get to a point where you really raise up a burr that you can feel. With a coarser stone, and you might be able to do that, but with a really fine stone like this, you probably won't feel a wire burr. But what you should feel and see is that the knife edge is getting sharper. So, you can just kind of feel that. Now, once you've, if you had to start with a coarser stone, then, several strokes on a coarser stone, both directions, and then switch over to the finer side and smooth that edge up and keep doing that. Get your angle like you want it. And then once you have the knife edge where you feel like it's pretty sharp and you can feel it, a strop is really helpful at that point to refine that edge. Now, with a stone, you'll see some people go in circles. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just not generally what I do. I tend to cut forward on a stone like I'm taking a thin slice off the stone. If you want a burr and you drag the knife the other way, you'll definitely get a burr because it will drag a burr up on the blade. By going forward, you're less likely to find that burr, but you will create a really nice sharp edge. Once you've got a good sharp edge, with a strop, you never go forward into it. You'll cut the leather. You have to pull it. And you don't want to put too much pressure on. Remember, this leather is a little bit soft, and if you bear down real hard, you're actually pressing the knife edge into that soft leather, and it will effectively roll the tip of the very edge of your knife blade. It'll kind of round it or roll it. So you're just going to lightly, light pressure, pull it several times, and you'll actually see your strop get a little darker as it wears off some metal, and then do the other direction a few times. And you don't have to do it for, a long time. A half dozen strokes in each direction generally, and maybe a dozen at the most, is about all I usually end up doing, usually about a half dozen, and that'll make a nice sharp edge. So, some things to remember. Important thing, number 1 is safety. Try to get your fingertips below the stone. If you can't, if you're using something like one of these cards, just be very careful not to get your knife blade into your fingers. You can buy those gloves that are cut resistant, and if you're concerned about that, some cut resistant gloves might be a good idea. But like I say, even as a young man, I never cut my fingers doing this just because I was careful. And you know, knife use and knife care and sharpening is something you have to be very careful with. You're dealing with something that's very sharp, so you just have to be careful and not, you know, be distracted. Pay attention to what you're doing, and just don't run the knife edge into your fingers. That's one thing you've got to be careful of. I guess you could hold it back like this and whatever, but the stone's going to be kind of unstable. Like I said, if you're concerned about this, at least some leather gloves would be, heavy leather gloves would be helpful, or some cut resistant gloves. You can get cut resistant gloves even at the sporting goods store. They sell them for people that fillet fish and stuff. They're not too expensive, and I'll see if I can find some and link them in the description down below. So if you're really concerned, you can do that. But I have done this, like I say, for a long time. I try to keep my fingertips below the edge of the stone, and that way, you know, and to be honest, I never run to the end of the stone anyway, because if you go off the edge of the stone, you're going to scratch up the side of your blade. So it's not something you want to do anyway. And then once I get the knife where I feel it's as sharp as it's going to be, a few strop, you know, same angle that you developed for the stone, pull the knife blade along your strop, and it'll polish the edge. Now, Flex Cut Gold does an amazing job of polishing the knife edge. So that's pretty much it. It's not real complicated. It just takes practice. So, you know, get out a knife that's a little bit dull and a stone, and you know, like I say, use a Sharpie if you want to see where that edge is. Just, you can take the side of the tip of the Sharpie. Don't try to use the very tip of it. Just use the side and drag along the edge so that you're just putting this marking material right on the edge. And then that way, as you sharpen, you can actually see where you're wearing off the Sharpie. And from that, you can take a stroke or two and say, well, I'm too far back. I'm not at the edge of the, you know, you might have to look real close, or maybe even get a magnifying glass. But you'll be able to see that you're either, you know, you're removing the Sharpie from the entire edge, or you're at the very edge of it, or you're away from the edge. You'll be able to kind of see. And it takes practice. And being able to learn to hold the knife at a consistent angle, stroke after stroke, is something that just takes practice. And that's where the practice part of it comes in, is first learning how to establish your angle and then maintaining that angle. For me, this is not a motion from one hand, it's actually two. You'll notice that I'm actually moving the stone and the knife. The knife and the stone come together. I'm actually turning the stone as I do this. And that's just kind of helps me, you know, go around the curve of the tip and then up the edge. So it's just a method that I have developed over the years, and I have gotten to where I can be very successful. I can carry a stone in the field. If I'm really wanting a good sharp edge, I'll carry this strop with me too. You could make an even smaller one. I've actually had some people tell me to take and just rub the compound on the case for my double stuff, and that way I could use it as a strop, but then it would get that compound stuff all over the inside of my laptop bag or whatever I'm carrying, and that would be kind of messy. So I could cut a piece of leather on maybe something thinner and slide in there with it. So there's several things I could do like that to try to make a more portable strop, but this isn't too bad, and it's very lightweight, hardly weighs a thing, and I can carry it with me and, you know, do my stropping. So there are some commercial strops you can buy that are pretty compact. This is one by Hutzel's. I did a review of one of their knives not too long ago, and they sent me this to look at. To be honest, I haven't really played much with it yet, but it's got suede on one side and smooth leather on the other, nice and lightweight. I'll put a link in the description for this too. There's a number of these out there, but they sent me this one to kind of evaluate, and it's a future thing coming up. But I'll go ahead and put a link in the description. I think it's a strop. There's not a whole lot of technology there that would have to be worried about. So the main thing is the stropping compound. Of all that I've used, the Flex Cut Gold is my favorite. It produces just a mirror finish on knife edges and woodworking tools. Just does a great job. Anyway, that's freehand sharpening. Well, there you go. I hope some of that information was helpful and you're able to sharpen your knives and get them nice and sharp. like I say, it's a skill you have to develop, so don't get frustrated or discouraged if you don't get something working right away. I know that it takes some time. I struggled with it when I was a little kid, and it took me a while to figure out how to do it and develop a process and a way to do it that is successful. But I think if you'll give it some time and you'll practice at it and think about what you're doing, so that you're not just putting a knife on the stone and just dragging it across, but really kind of think about what you're doing, I think you'll do really well. Well, if you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I always love hearing from you. And as always, thanks for watching.